Today we speak with Tony from Celigo. He will tell us all about how to step out of your comfort zone and how to make you grow in an organization that is growing. It's going to be very exciting. Stay tuned. Welcome to HR Visionaries, where we unlock the secrets of modern HR. I'm Benjamin, your host. Join us as we shed light on today's HR universe with HR leaders and innovators from across the globe. Whether you're an HR pro, a business leader, or just curious about the future of work, this is your shortcut to the forefront of HR innovation. Brought to you by Hire, the AI talent attraction platform. Welcome to our new HR Visionaries podcast, and we have a very great guest today, Tony. Welcome to HR Visionaries.
Ben, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tony, can you say a few sentences about yourself? Who is Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tony Deblauwe, I am currently the Vice President of Human Resources for Celigo. I've been in some facet of HR life for well over 20 years, spanning pretty much everything: recruiting, operations, organizational development, learning and development, executive coaching. So I've seen quite a lot of things, and I've been in both big companies, startups, always in tech companies, always in Silicon Valley. But most of those companies, many of those companies are obviously global reach. So I've been very fortunate to be in many different environments and able to try many different initiatives, programs, and things.
So you have worked your entire life in the Bay Area?
Yes. I mean, I've traveled. I worked at Nokia, so I was able to go to Finland, and I worked at Schlumberger, so I got to go to France, and so a lot of these bigger companies had presence in different states and, of course, different countries. So I've been able to travel for business because of those different companies.
Can you tell us, why did you go into HR in the first place?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. My backstory, if you will, was I thought I was going to be a genetic engineer. I was always interested in genetics. I was always interested in science. And for one reason or another, I ended up focusing on more the psychology side of things. So I was curious about biology always, but generally, how did that affect the mind and how did that affect behavior at a chemistry level? But so I started to think like, okay, well, if genetics maybe have some influence in who you are, how you show up, and so on, the whole nature nurture thing, I just found myself diving further into that. So I ended up with a degree in psychology, and that changed the course, because when you're coming out of school with a degree in psychology versus, say, chemistry or biology, some of the roles are different. So eventually I found myself needing to get some work. That turned eventually into recruiting for a startup, for doing biotech placements, and then it evolved from there, and my roles evolved from there. So really the falling into HR came through recruiting.
What did fascinate you in biology? So why was it something you found worth exploring and then developing yourself from the very science part towards like, hey, I want to work with people. I want to, enable people to to find their purpose.
Sure. Well, it really evolved through recruiting. So the first part was when you're hiring for scientists and so forth in biotech related roles, it was great to be able to have a banter with people at a technical level but my mindset was different. Now it's not just a scientific investigation, but are you qualified for this role? But I really enjoyed those conversations. I really enjoyed getting to know people. And so my interest started to kind of shift. So I still had the opportunity to talk through recruiting and interviewing the science stuff that I enjoyed. but for a different purpose. And that gave me expansion into, well, what is the world of companies out there? I learned so much about different organizations, how they function, how business runs. And I started to become, I guess, in the scientific method, more curious, because candidates would ask me questions. Well, what about 401k? What about, this? What about that? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm here to interview you for qualification for the job. So I would go and ask, like, tell me more about this. Tell me more about stock options. Tell me more about these things. So I wanted to be a better recruiter. That was the basis of it. And so then as I started to learn more things, I looked for opportunities to expand my role. And I would ask, for instance, when I was at Schlumberger, there was an opportunity to do, people are going to laugh, a 401k audit, which is really boring. Okay. But I said, hey, I have to learn somehow, and I have to, do the dirty work first and then build my base of knowledge. And so that's what I did. I would go through manually looking at plans and associations and things and try to familiarize myself, educate myself on what are different plan types. So very quickly, I became really good at that. And I immediately applied it to my interviewing. So now I appreciated the plan, like, oh my gosh, we got a great benefits plan. But now I could talk about it in a technical way with the kind of depth that I was doing when I was assessing candidates. And that's what I wanted. It's like, if I'm going to be having these conversations, I want to make sure that I'm knowledgeable, that I'm able to do it more than at a surface level. And so then one piece after another started to grow. Career pathing was a natural progression out of recruiting, learning and development, talent retention, talent management. I was getting involved with calibration conversations because it was going to affect headcount and planning and capacity. So it was a very natural, almost, I would say, fluid role going into, tell me more about this, taking a little piece of work, increasing my scope of responsibility steadily. And then the next thing I know, my career path had different options. Hey, why don't you be a generalist? Why don't you be an organizational development specialist? Do some employee relations. So that's really how it happened. But it all started with that same curiosity to ask, get some information, get my hands dirty, and then build my knowledge base.
You mentioned you have always worked for tech companies. And do you think that's a specialty of a tech company to enable such development?
I think so. I think that there's more opportunity. Obviously, Silicon Valley, it moves very, very quickly. People talk about that all the time. And I'm someone who always tries to put a different lens on these things, because you hear all this stuff coming at you. But the truth of the matter is, some people are wired for this. Mm-hmm. I was. It wasn't overwhelming to be, context shifting constantly. And that's what tech does, especially in the startup worlds, right? Your biggest strength isn't that you have to know everything. It's that you can juggle multiple things at the same time. You don't get stressed out with a 12+ hour day. You want to get it done. You want to solve. You want to go forward, right? I think that tech has, for people who like that, who like the challenge, who like the learning, who like the constant context switching, that is great. Other environments, it may not be that way. It may be more predictable, maybe more structured. And so it's harder to swim out of your lane, so to speak, right? Or there's fewer opportunities for you to even what I consider sort of internal internships, where you just align yourself with some people like I did in Schlumberger to learn benefits. I wasn't paid more for doing that. It was extra work. But how else was I going to learn from a book? I'd rather see it actually happen, have someone, help me. And in exchange, of course, I'm helping them by doing that work, but it's giving me that knowledge. So I think that it really depends on your environment. But in tech, again, especially startups, there's just a pacing that throws more at you. that you have to quickly sort and so on. There's a lot of things that I didn't know, that I had to use my wits and logic and like, this kind of makes sense. And I didn't always have people to ask. I didn't have always people to verify. So again, it really depends on your personality. If you feel like you need that constant hand holding and structure, and you're worried about making the wrong decision, I made plenty of wrong decisions. And I got my hands slapped hard, arguably by today's standards, unfairly and harshly so, because I was learning. I didn't know. I was 25, 26, right? But that's okay. You know, there's a resiliency to that too, right? You start to learn the skills of people's behavior. That's where it brings me back to psychology and some of the science. Like, what are people's behaviors under stress? You start to get really fascinated with, this person's really nice to go, you know, after hours, go to lunch, but they turn into something else when they're stressed out at work. Why? So that curiosity often creates a safety barrier for you too. Like, people they get weird at work, you know, whether we like it or not. So I was learning with that as well, so that I could be, again, always back to, how does it help me in my practice? How does it help me when I'm sitting across someone who's an employee, has an issue, or a manager that needs coaching, or what have you? What is it that I'm learning from that experience? Was I always happy? No. Was I frustrated or angry, or this isn't fair? Of course I had those moments, but I tried to, you know, put myself in that objective state, like, that emotion is only going to last and get you so far. And I wanted to say, hey, learning for me and achieving from that learning is top of the list. So I have to figure out a way, what am I going to change? Because you're not going to change the person. How am I going to change, right? And that thread, while I wasn't always great with it, I had my moments too, but I always kind of came back to that. And I think that's what really helped me expand my knowledge and scope of responsibilities.
How can I, how can I picture you in those situations where you are, stepping out of your comfort zone, however, managing yourself? So, how can I, acquire those skills?
It's really by doing. So I'll give you another example of how I learned, you know, stock options. So of course, stock options, depending on who gets them, you know, from executive down to, you know, the first time associate person, right? They're all very different, you know, and then there's international rules, NSO, IS, like there's all these different rules in the game, right? I didn't want to become, you know, financial advisor or level stock expert person. I just want to understand, how does having stock add value to your overall compensation package, your engagement with the company? And again, back to behavior, how does it change the way you think about what you're doing, what your contribution is? Because now you're a stakeholder, and does that, and it should change your perspective of waste optimization, efficiency for yourself, for others, etc. That's part of the benefit of stock. While there's always that risk that it doesn't pan out. I mean, certainly I've been through enough startups to know that, you know, stock was given as this big thing to, you know, entice me. And then the company, or I left, or the company, you know, didn't do well, or whatever the case, you know, may be. But I think that when I was learning that, I was very careful, because I was still doing interviewing, and I have very knowledgeable people who, you know, used to getting stock, and they would ask me all these detailed questions. So I'm asking my stock administrator, I'm asking, you know, my boss. I said, how do I figure this out? I took a class, I took a course. So mind you, I was very nervous. I was very anxious, because I was doing a lot of this on my own. Nobody was sitting me down and saying, okay, let me walk through, answer all your questions. I had to go find it out on my own, bits and pieces. And I was nervous that I would come across as not competent. And I was very concerned that I gave off that vibe. I shouldn't have been, but again, and now I'm in still my late 20s. This is becoming more of a thing in the jobs that I'm doing. And people are looking to me. It's like, well, you're HR, you're recruiting, you should know this. So that kept going into my head. It's like, well, yes, I should know this. So beyond reading and asking questions, how did it show up? So in the early going, I made mistakes. I confused an NSO and an ISO and the terms and the rules to a candidate that, blew back on me later. I made a mistake on what they call a change of control and how that would affect stock and, time to vest and time to pay, buy vested shares versus unvested, RSUs, how that worked. So I got a little confused in the early going, and again, got my hand slapped, but I learned really, really quick. I mean, nothing was, again, earth-shattering that I cost the company, thousands of dollars because I said something incorrect, nothing like that. But for me, of course, I had all these thoughts in my mind. Am I going to lose my job? Are these mistakes unforgivable? I didn't quite yet understand the learning and working through these kinds of challenges, especially when it's not like some catastrophic life-ending mistake that nothing like that, right? And then trying to understand, why are people using sort of this mistake to be so harsh to me? And it was one of those kind of baseline moments about learning that I said, well, first of all, whenever I become a manager, I will never do that to my employees because mistakes happen. Second, I have to be accountable. I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. I want to be conscientious. I want to be accountable. And so I took it more. But then I learned from those pieces, of course, and then I started to say, okay, let me deep dive on that further. And then eventually I was able to talk about this better than people who were in finance and others that actually made the stock, paid out the stock, or whatever. And that made me, feel a lot better. The most important thing from all of that is, so that's how I felt. I felt nervous. My heart was beating. I made these mistakes. Oh my God. So I had all those emotions. But the biggest learning from that particular topic wasn't, okay, now you can talk to candidates and employees better about stock. It was how I educated, because, they say that hierarchy of learning, if you listen, it's 5%. If you listen and talk, it's 10%. And then eventually applying is really what makes it stick. Or teaching is what makes it stick. So that's what I would do. So now I'd have these up and coming HR generalists and other people, and I would sit them down because of onboarding and offboarding conversations where stock would come up. I would say, here's the cheat sheet, right? Let's talk through the high level. Let's talk through level 2. And if you need to get to level 3, just have them talk to me. But it was very empowering for me, that moment when I was a manager, to say, I'm going to give you what I never got. I never got somebody who took the time, mentored. I never had a mentor, right? I always had to go search it out, okay? And I said, I'm going to be much more deliberate. And that's been the case to this day. So, technical things, because it comes to me easier, right? HRIS, systems, software, building that kind of stuff. I explain to people, here's the basics. Like, just get through this and you'll already be very educated. I do it gladly, willingly. Everybody does have to pay their dues, okay, in their own way. But to the degree that I can help them on that journey to say, hey, let's accelerate your learning curve on the dues payment thing, okay? That's, I think, how I give back. And I love it, but it also selfishly helps reinforce, do I still know this stuff? Am I still competent with these things? And when I can explain it, I'm like, okay, whew, I did learn something.
Well, this approach towards teaching, towards mentoring, How do you think has this also changed in the entire tech industry in terms of like, okay, if you're at the very beginning, it's of course like much harder to find people who mentor, while nowadays many companies are a bit maturer than they were a few years ago, and how has this changed?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think it's a mix. Time, pressure, all these things always get in the way of maybe more formalized programs. Certainly there's more formalized programs. I always tell people, don't wait for a formalized program. Go out and seek your mentors. And sometimes your mentor can be someone in your own team who just happens to have a skill set or a knowledge about something that's relevant to you, interesting to you. So, have some coffee, take them to lunch, do something, right? So internal organizational networking is as important as external networking. I tell people networking never stops. It never goes away. People still need to know who you are, what you're interested in, why it matters. And people often don't want to take that time. And that's to their detriment. I've definitely think I've seen it, and I think there are some people like that who still have my manager's going to come to me, and if I just do a good job, I'm going to get promoted, and that never worked. Okay, that's not just a generational thing. That never worked. So what's much more on display, I feel, now more than ever, is you have to really take control of your career path. Right. So if you're trying to change, and again, it's not necessarily level moving. You have to think about, how do I increase my scope of responsibilities? So that might be asking somebody, is there something that I can do? Of course, in HR, sometimes it's a little bit different because you have confidentiality. And so there's a little bit more of a bar that you have to say, like, I'd love for you to come help me. I'm resource deprived. You're going to come work for me for free, a percentage of your time for you to learn. But I can't give you access to some of this stuff. That's sometimes the only real challenge. So you have to stick around things like development, talent management, some of those outside of the confidential system work. But there's plenty to do that. How do you improve onboarding? How do you improve offboarding? How do you improve the connection with your cohorts like IT, payroll, right? So there's process initiative things you can do, company recognition, culture and events, DEI. There's a lot of different things you can get involved in that don't have some of those concerns. So now, as of 2023, we have AI. So AI is going to continue to evolve. A lot of companies are doing in HR, I would say arguably the majority, the first project they want to do with AI is take all their knowledge base, policies, handbook, and coach it and train the AI to give people the information for first level stuff. So that, I think, is going to help in two ways. One, for those people who are still very shy and the whole reaching out and networking and finding a mentor, eventually these tools will help them to ask basic questions and get the kind of answers that I had to go chase at that basic level, because there wasn't, a wiki and there wasn't stuff built in the early days, right? But the second thing I think it can help with is structuring the ask. And right now, AI is great for doing that. You can write a prompt for as long as you want, as much detail as you want. You can tell the AI, briefer, longer, not quite right, whatever. So when you think about pitching a mentor, pitching your boss, helping to form your thoughts, what do I really want to do? What am I trying to achieve? How am I trying to grow professionally? That will help you with that dialogue. Now you have somebody who says, here, I'm going to sharpen the ask for you, right? And I think that that's very, very different. And so if you put all those tools together, plus, of course, the existing internet and so forth, whereas before I had to go, there was, Zoom, it wasn't really a thing. I had to go to conferences. I had to go to career fairs. I had to go reach out to people and have lunch and go have coffee. And, there was much, much more of that. If you're not doing the reach out and going to the places where you have the physical interaction, there's nothing that's a backup, right? Nothing. Maybe a trade journal, a publication, but there's nothing. Okay. When LinkedIn came on the scene, that was a big thing. But in the early days of LinkedIn, groups and everything we're used to now, that wasn't a thing in LinkedIn. So it's really take advantage of the tools that are there. You don't need to be stuck at all anymore. But one thing that is still consistent is you have to be clear about your plan. You have to know what you're after. And sometimes you have to ask a couple questions to a couple people to know, oh yeah, this is what I'm after, right? Like I knew I wanted to transition out of recruiting, okay? And then ultimately, how you come across and how you structure those things so people can help you the best with the tools that are out there now should be easier.
And I find this is super interesting conversation given, well, in particular now that we focus so much on prompts. I think in philosophical terms, so to say, I think it's super interesting that we go from, hey, I'm after an answer towards like, okay, let me think about whether I asked the right question in the first place. And we do so much work around asking the right question so that we, in the end, come up or that we have a machine coming up with a great answer is like an amazing development at the end.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like, it's the, the compendium of all of these advances and, human interventions. It's great. Again, from an HR perspective, game changing is, I think, the appropriate word. It's just going to continue to evolve. It's going to continue to synthesize all these different technologies. And unlike maybe some people who are really scared about what this future looks like, I'm an optimist. I believe that, the same conversation, it's funny, if you go on YouTube and search early conversations about the internet, there was a similar tone, right? It's going to take over. It's going to do all these things.
Exactly.
So yeah, I look, and I certainly believe that there should be some controls on AI, to a degree, and if you believe in the free market and all of those things, there's some letting it be and not too restrictive, as we've seen in certain attempts with the internet. Some of those controls become, very restrictive. But as an optimization tool, as a tool that can help an HR practitioner or anybody be better at what they do and bring more of their experience and thoughts into a clearer path to getting things done or being creative or inventive and so forth, I think it's great. And we have to look at it from that perspective as opposed to all the doom and gloom side of it.
Tony, I have one last question.
Okay.
So what does Celigo does?
Sorry, what is Celigo?
So what do you guys do actually?
Oh, what do we do?
So we haven't talked about that yet. Yes.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. So we are an integration company, which basically means that when you have all these different apps floating around in your organization, a lot of them don't talk to each other. And oftentimes, if there's any kind of, if people are familiar with APIs, have a very limited connection. But how do we get all that data together? How do we make that work? How do we automate that data from an integration perspective? That's what Celigo does. So we have the power with our software to make all these different apps talk to each other, right? Our most, common one is all of your e-commerce sites like Shopify, Amazon talking to NetSuite, right? That's one of our most well-known connections, right? Oftentimes I joke and think, if you like Marvel movies and you like Thor, think of it as we're the Bifrost Bridge, right? So Thor can go to any universal point through the Bifrost Bridge, right? Similar with Celigo. So we connect all of these things to create that wholly connected enterprise and automate that. So naturally, what's great about Celigo in that position is with AI and with all these different technologies, this is becoming much, much more critical for companies, right? And think about HR in particular. We're one of the worst places in the organization. We have all kinds of disparate apps. We got a recognition app, we got an HRIS, sometimes we have a performance app, a coaching app, a recruiting app, and half the time or more, they never talk to each other. So you're trying to get strategic as an HR person, right? You're trying to see the pattern of all of these things. You're trying to build a process workflow through all of those things, but they're all disparate. Or the most critical thing is you're wasting time. I have to double enter somebody's record from the recruiting tool into the HR tool, into the payroll tool if they're disconnected. So you waste a lot of time as well. So that's one of the main reasons I came here, is because like, this is interesting, right? I'd seen this in the past over the years, but I never had these tools. And most of the companies I worked at never had a tool like this. So what did I have to do? I'd have to have a bigger staff, or I'd have to take a generalist or two, and they'd have to waste their time with all this double entry. And guess what that would create? Data integrity problems, data quality problems, on and on and on. So to be able to say, hey, no, I can configure something that creates a flow down to things like reporting on headcount, metrics, key HR metrics, but to know that it's all, in one spot, that's great. And send that to my buddies in IT, send that to my buddies in finance, so that we have one, source of truth. So it's very, very, very powerful software, and I'm really excited about where we're at and where we're going.
And for me, to be honest, it's actually the worst kind of task to know. And maybe when you know, okay, well, what I'm doing has been done already twice or three times, and I have to do it again because there's a technical flaw somewhere. And that's the only reason why I'm doing now something someone has done, or even I have done like multiple times prior to that. I think it's probably the most frustrating kind of task one can have.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and again, I think that the other part of where we're at now is the demand is going to be higher to be having higher throughput in HR. Mm-hmm. So, you have people who are at the business level, don't know what we do, and just say, well, there's just AI. You're like, well, hold on. Okay. First of all, there's, rules to be governed around security and confidentiality. We have to worry about those things. Our security teams, our legal teams have to worry about that from an enterprise AI perspective. But it's like anything else ever in the past, right? If you've not thought through your core of information, business process workflow, and try to jam it into something, of course it's going to come out trash in, trash out, right? So if at the very least you can create these workflows to these different endpoints in your organization using something like Celigo, because they don't do it out of the box, or it's very expensive to build out an API from scratch. And yeah, let's put all that aside. Let's get our data correct, right? And then we can sprinkle the AI pixie dust on top of that, so that we can further improve our processes and our employee experience and so forth, right? But you really have to think about the combination of all of that stuff. And that's why, like I said, I'm very excited. As someone who has been on that other side and having had to build out an API, and the out of the box was only 5 fields, I needed 15, and it was going to cost me $10,000 to build out the other. I know very, very much, and that's another reason why I was attracted to Celigo, because I've been on the other side. I've had to figure out, and I'm not a coder by any sense, but I know enough that I'm able to instruct someone, okay, here's how I want it to work, and construct it. That's very time consuming, and unfortunately, it doesn't last. If you have a very simple system that doesn't change much, okay, maybe it works. But as I said earlier, I'm not used to that. I'm used to constant change, dynamically changing. We have to add fields, not unlike what marketing and sales does with Salesforce, right? They have to add fields. There's different customer demands, right? HR, same thing. We have to evolve our systems to the business. It's not, we need to kowtow to the tool. The tool has to serve us, or the tools need to serve us. So Celigo, again, is one of those things that help to bring all things together and make that vision of a completely connected technology, especially in HR, but across the...
Tony, if you say that last sentence again, I think there was a connection issue.
Oh, there's a glitch in the matrix.
Yeah, exactly. Glitch in the matrix indeed.
No, I was just basically summing up and saying it's great to be able to have the combination of, integration, automation that Celigo brings, and pairing that with the other tools so that you get the most value out of all of these apps that you have. And HR is especially benefited from that.
Perfect. Tony, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for elaborating on your journey, on how to build a great organization, and, well, to stay open-minded, to get out of your comfort zone. That was very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben.
And for everyone who listened to our podcast, thanks a lot for listening in, and stay tuned for the next one.